for joining us today on our tour of From Fairy Tale to Fantasy, the art of Gustaf Tenggren. Today we're celebrating an artist that maybe you don't know his face, but you definitely know his art and the beloved characters that he created. This exhibition celebrates the 100th anniversary of Gustaf Tenggren coming to the United States, the 50th anniversary of his death, and it's actually the largest collection of his work in the States since 1986. So we're going to be looking at Tenggren's art today and trying to explore the magical, moody, and enchanting atmosphere that was in a lot of his artwork, just like the artist himself. So this first section, we're going to be looking at his early life and inspiration. So Gustaf Tenggren was born in November of 1896. He was actually born on King Gustavus Day, so they named him Gustavus Adolfo. He was the sixth child of Aaron and Augusta Tenggren. And shortly after he was born, they moved from the small village of Magra to the city of Gothenburg. And after that, his father, Aaron, actually moved to the United States, and Tenggren never saw his father again after the age of 4. We can see here a family photo from a little bit later on. He has his sisters here, his mother. 2 of his sisters have already moved to the United States, and there's a portrait of his father here as well. At this time, Gustaf created a really great relationship with his grandfather, who was a carpenter and a painter, and we'll see a lot of that influence later on in some of his artwork. While he was in school in Gothenburg, his teachers noticed that he had a lot of natural artistic talent and encouraged his mother to get him into an art school. And so at 13, he enrolled in the design and craft school in Gothenburg. And you can see in this picture here, he actually has a self-portrait up at the top that was around 1913. While he was in school, he began doing some small illustrations for newspapers and magazines, and he eventually met the brother of John Bauer, who was the famous illustrator of Among Gnomes and Trolls. And in 1917, he was given one story to illustrate in that version of the Gnomes and Trolls. And by 1918, he was illustrating the entire book as John Bauer had decided to step away. Tenggren kept that contract and actually illustrated 10 editions of the Among Gnomes and Trolls, where the original illustrator John Bauer only did 8 himself. So as we look here along, we can see some of the early work. This work's actually a little bit later, when he was already in America. But a lot of different themes in his artwork, as we see Tenggren later on is really associated with children's illustration. A lot of his work in the beginning in ads and illustrations for magazines, he did all sorts of subject matter. Next, we'll look at Tenggren's early career in America. In 1920, he moved to Cleveland, Ohio with his first wife, Anna Peterson. One of his sisters actually already lived in Cleveland, and on his visa, he wrote 3 months as his length of stay. But Tenggren actually never went back to Sweden, so he stayed in America for the rest of his life. In his early days in Cleveland, he quickly gained notoriety as a magazine and newspaper illustrator and was working in a lot of advertisements and commercial art. He later met Molly Fralberg, who would become his second wife, and they moved to New York City in 1923. So at this time in New York City, living in Manhattan, this was the high point of the 20s and in Gustaf's and Molly's life as well. You can see here for this ad for the dromedary dates, Tenggren actually was paid $450 for this ad. And at some point, he might have been making up to $5,000 a week with all of his artwork. During this time, he was also still creating for Among Gnomes and Trolls, so he was sending artwork back to Sweden for the publishers there. So as we said, Tenggren was very successful during this time in the 20s, creating a lot of illustrations for magazines such as the Red Book magazine. You can see here Rio Magdalena and this second piece called The Free Night. These were both in the December issue 1934 in Red Book. And as we can see in some of these pieces, Tenggren's themes and the subjects that he created art for were really varied early on in his career. But we'll see later, he does get known for all of the children's illustration. So like many people at the time, Tenggren was affected by the crash in 1929, and he moved to the upstate New York countryside for a few years with Molly. During this time, he continued to illustrate for books and magazines. And in 1935, they moved back to New York City. But only for a short time. At this point, Disney had been pursuing an artist to work on some of their feature-length films that they were beginning to create. And Tenggren got a job with Disney, and they ended up moving to Los Angeles. So in 1935, Tenggren begins working for the Walt Disney Studios. He signed a 3-year contract, and the first film that he was brought on for was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So he was brought in as an art director to help oversee the overall style of the film. Disney was looking for the moody, fairy tale, romantic European atmosphere for this film. But Snow White was actually almost nearly complete by the time Tenggren came onto the project. So he ended up working on a lot of the marketing materials. So here we can see the full-length poster that was for the film. And so that was what Tenggren had worked on. And he also worked on a series of illustrations that went into Good Housekeeping magazine to tell the story as well. So here we can see Snow White and the Witch with the Poison Apple. So this did a lot to help publicize the film. So the next project that Tenggren worked on was Pinocchio, and this one he had a lot more say and a lot more involvement in the piece. So we can look here at all of these different images from the background images for Pinocchio. And you can see here a lot of the influence of that Swedish curvet style through all of the homes and the way the town was set up. And if we look over here at some of these storyboard sketches, we can see, again, that Swedish curvet style, especially in Geppetto's workshop, which we believe was based off of Gustaf Tenggren's grandfather's carpentry and painting workshop. Again, you can see it in this one where it's his workbench. So Tenggren was expertly able to repackage this European style for the American audience. in the film of Pinocchio. Excuse us as we take a walk to the other side of the gallery here. So the last film that Tenggren worked on was Bambi, and he helped do a lot of the development and background drawings. But Disney ended up going in a different way and picking another artist to lead this project. Tenggren had gone out to the national parks in California and had done a lot of drawing in situ for Bambi. But Disney thought that his drawings were too detailed and didn't have the right atmosphere that he was looking for, and complained that Tenggren had painted every leaf. So ultimately, Tenggren left after working through the Bambi film, and his contract had ended, so he had left Disney. One of the other projects he worked on was The Old Mill, which ended up winning an Academy Award for short film. So Tenggren was a little bit of a loner. He didn't necessarily like the collaborative atmosphere of the Disney projects. So once he left Disney, he was very happy to be working on his own again and go back to doing some illustration in his own studio space. So after working with Disney, Gustaf and Molly moved back to New York, and he actually gets hired as a contractor by the Writers and Artists Guild to begin illustrating for books. And because of his notoriety with working with Disney, they include his name, Tenggren, in the title of a lot of these books. So you'll see Tenggren's Mother Goose, and they start working on the Little Golden Book series. They had wanted to be able to expand sales and the production process and offer these books for as low as 25 cents. And the Little Golden Books were immediately successful. The 12 original volumes that came out, they sold out the first print run of 600,000 books. And so Tenggren would go on to do the large ones as well, that's pictured here as he's reading with some children. And the Pokey Little Puppy was the most well-known of the Little Golden Book series. And as of 2000 in Publisher Weeklies, they called it the best-selling book of the 20th century, selling over 50 million copies. So you can definitely see a style change here in Gustaf's art as we go. These books undeniably have their cuteness factor and color blocking, where in some of his earlier work you can see was a lot more detailed. Here we have the image from Thumbelina, the Golden Goose, and one of my favorites, the Lion's Paw. So the last part of our exhibit focuses on the final years of Gustaf Tenggren's life. So him and Molly were living on the East Coast, and they did a lot of sailing. And in 1945, they found a property in Southport Island in Maine and decided to purchase the property and move here. It was a great place where they could live and also have a studio space for Tenggren to work in. He was reluctant to receive visitors, and Molly maintained a lot of the contacts with his clients at this time as he continued to work on projects. And you can see this really lovely portrait of him and Molly together. This is at Dogfish Head. And around the time they moved in, they had also found a large collection of Swedish antiques in the Kurbit style at a local antique shop, and they used this to furnish their home. So Tenggren later on was asked to create this cover for the Saturday Evening Post about Walt Disney, and that came out in 1956. It's a great image with all of those notable characters. So during this time, Tenggren continued to work on children's book illustrations. These come from an unpublished book on mythologies and legends. He was hoping to create this book as a pension for Molly, but like we said, they were unpublished. And you can see here the wonderful title image that we took for the exhibit. So as we've seen throughout Tenggren's work, he kind of went a little bit from light and darkness throughout his career. We can see that again here at the end of his life. And these really dark works that were done in 1965 focus on environmental destruction. He had read Rachel Carson's Silent Spring and was inspired by that to create these works. So something very different from some of the other artwork that we have seen before. So as we end here in the exhibition, we end in Gustaf's life as well. He passed away in 1970 due to lung cancer. And interestingly, the doctor and Molly had agreed not to tell Tenggren about the disease, so he passed away without knowing that he was sick. And after his life, Molly donated much of his artwork to the University of Minnesota, and she also donated the antique collection that furnished their home to the Dalarna Museum. And that's why we're able to put together this beautiful exhibition right now. So thank you all for coming along on this tour, and we look forward to any questions that you have.